there anything about either spacecraft that you found you liked more about the other, that stood out as a feature, especially in terms of crew amenities?
More Velcro on SpaceX, on Dragon. That's a crew amenity.
That's a crew amenity, which
we've talked about that. That's why I said it.
A sleeker design with fewer buttons and totally automatic operation are the notable features that NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams highlights after returning to Earth aboard SpaceX Crew Dragon. Dragon isn't just advanced, it's reliable. With its proven safety record, it was the spacecraft that NASA trusted to rescue the stranded astronauts due to Boeing Star liner's thruster failures and helium leaks. And yet, Wilmore and Williams still prefer Starliner and say they'd rather fly on it again. Wait, what? That's like barely surviving a near-fatal car accident, only to turn around and say, yeah, I'd totally drive that same car again. So why are they so committed to Starliner? Find out everything in today's TechMap episode. Despite the thruster failures and unexpected mission extension during their recent trip, NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore say they'd fly Starliner again.
I have a question for both you, Suni, and Butch. Given an opportunity, would you guys go up on Starliner again?
Yes, because we're going to rectify all the issues that we encountered. Yeah. We're going to fix it. We're going to make it work.
This is what they said in the March 31st press conference. So, what motivated them to ride on CST-100 again?
Boeing's completely committed, NASA is completely committed, and with that, I get on in a heartbeat.
They have then given many compliments on this vehicle.
It is a great spacecraft, and it has a lot of capability that other spacecraft don't have. And to see that thing successful and to be part of that program is an honor.
Willmore also cited that characteristic of Starliner, the ability of astronauts to take control of the capsule at any moment, as opposed to Crew Dragon's more straightforward, idiot-proof autonomous flight.
There's no spacecraft that has all of this capability. I mean, I jokingly said a couple of times before we launched that I could literally do a barrel roll over the top of the space station. I would never do that, but you can in this spacecraft. It is very, very capable.
Or in the exclusive interview with Ars Technical, Williams told about the perfect launch aboard Starliner last summer. Oh man, the launch was awesome. Both of us looked at each other like, wow, this is going just perfectly. So the ride to space and the orbit insertion burn, all perfect. Their turbulent mission has also given Williams and Wilmore a unique perspective. They are the only astronauts to have flown in both Starliner and Crew Dragon, the two commercial spacecraft contracted by NASA to ferry people to and from the ISS. Of Dragon, Suni praises it as a comfortable spacecraft.
Dragon is a very comfortable spacecraft that tells you what it's doing, which is very nice versus having to interpret displays as we have done throughout the space programs with, former programs, including shuttle.
In addition, the pair was attracted to the amenities of the Crew Dragon.
Was there anything about either spacecraft that you found you liked more about the other, that stood out as a feature, especially in terms of crew amenities?
More Velcro on SpaceX, on Dragon.
A sleeker design with fewer buttons apparently leaves plenty of surface area inside Crew Dragon for strips of Velcro astronauts can use to secure things like pens or notebooks from floating away. SpaceX's Crew Dragon isn't just another spacecraft. It's a revolution in spaceflight technology. Designed from the ground up for the 21st century, it merges cutting-edge automation, sleek design, and intuitive controls, redefining how astronauts interact with their vehicle. As SpaceX engineer John Fetterspiel put it, the goal was to create a vehicle that truly felt like a 21st century spaceship. Spaceflight has come a long way from the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo eras, where astronauts relied on hundreds of switches, dials, indicator lights, and analog gauges. A cockpit that felt more like an aircraft than a spacecraft. Back then, pilots used mechanical keyboards and joystick-like control sticks to operate their ships manually. Crew Dragon changes everything. Instead of a sea of physical buttons, astronauts interact with just 3 large touchscreens that control nearly every aspect of the spacecraft. These high-resolution displays allow them to navigate through multiple system panels, monitoring guidance, environmental controls, electrical systems, and more, all with a few taps. The ultimate goal of Crew Dragon's design? To make flying a spacecraft as seamless as possible. As Doug Hurley, commander of SpaceX's first crewed mission in May 2020, explained, "You have an overall systems page on the screen, and then you can drill down into individual pages as well. There's a total of 25 to 30 individual pages, and SpaceX may have added some more since my flight. With any aircraft or spacecraft, you always iterate because it makes sense and it's easy and will help the crew. Ideally, astronauts won't have to touch the controls at all. Crew Dragon is designed to operate entirely autonomously, handling launch, orbit, docking, and re-entry without human intervention. But what if something goes wrong? Before the crew takes over, mission control serves as the first line of defense. SpaceX's ground team can troubleshoot issues and send remote commands in real time, acting as a safety net before the astronauts ever need to step in. And the final backup: manual control. Only in the rare event that both automation and ground control fail would the astronauts manually fly the spacecraft. A dramatic departure from earlier spacecraft, where pilots were hands-on from start to finish. This shift gives astronauts a radically different experience, one that feels both futuristic and exhilarating. Crew Dragon isn't just another spacecraft. It's a glimpse into the future of human spaceflight. Nevertheless, after all, Butch and Suni still continuously emphasized that Starliner is a truly wonderful spacecraft and expressed optimism about the future of the spacecraft.
If we can figure out a couple of very important primary issues with the thrusters and the helium system, Starliner is ready to go. We have to do some tests, we have to do some integrated tests, we have to bring it all together in a process of qualification that is not going to happen overnight.
This spring and summer, NASA and Boeing will conduct a series of propulsion system tests and in-depth analyses as engineers work to resolve Starliner's ongoing issues. Once these challenges are addressed, NASA aims to move forward with certification and schedule the spacecraft's first operational mission. However, the agency does not anticipate that Starliner will be ready until late this year or early next year. Mission planners intend for the next Starliner flight to serve as a post-certification mission capable of carrying a crew. However, it remains uncertain whether astronauts will be on board or if the mission will be limited to cargo. On the other hand, in a worst-case scenario, if Boeing fails to resolve the propulsion system issues, NASA may be forced to conduct yet another uncrewed test flight, Starliner's fourth. The astronauts' confidence is reassuring, but does it tell the whole story? Let's be real. The Starliner program has been a 10-year saga of major technical failures. And despite all the reassurances, NASA and Boeing still haven't fully fixed the core issue: the propulsion system failure. There is skepticism about the design and manufacturing process, with some suggesting that the problems are systemic and could lead to more severe consequences if not properly addressed. So why should we believe that this time is any different? NASA has been publicly standing by Starliner, but given their history of go-fever decision-making, does their confidence still hold the weight with us? Or is this just another high-stakes gamble with human lives? Before Starliner's crew flight test, astronaut Butch Willmore openly voiced his biggest concern: the thrusters and valves. Previous OFT, orbital flight test, missions already had failures. But here's the real problem. Engineers never get the hardware back. Starliner's service module is jettisoned before the capsule returns, so they're left with nothing but data and engineering judgment to diagnose issues. Willmore put it bluntly in an exclusive interview with Ars Technical recently. If we lost thrusters, we could be in a situation where we're in space and can't control it. That's what I was thinking. And oh my, what happened? We lost the first thruster. And that's exactly what happened during Starliner's approach to the ISS. Except it didn't stop at one failure. As they neared the ISS, 5 thrusters failed one after another. Helium leaks continued. And suddenly, Wilmore and Suni Williams were no longer fully in control. At that moment, they had to make an impossible choice. Attempt to dock manually despite major failures. Abort and return to Earth with a spacecraft they couldn't fully control. Thankfully, Mission Control pulled through, keeping communication open and sending commands to assist the astronauts. In the end, the spacecraft managed to dock, but let's not pretend this was a successful mission. So far, I also am unbelieving that the Boeing spacecraft was clearly not 100% ready for human flight, so why push forward? Beyond that, why didn't the astronauts reveal these serious failures until after they were safely back on Earth and after the election? Coincidence? Or is there more to the story? And most importantly, why would they agree to fly on that death trap again? Is it because they genuinely trust the spacecraft and believe NASA and Boeing will fix the issues? Is it because they've developed some kind of loyalty or attachment to Starliner despite its failures? Or, let's be real, is it simply because NASA has no alternative options right now? Maybe I'm reading too much into this. But what's your take? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. Anyway, let's take a moment to send a massive thank you to the incredible team at NASA's Mission Control in Houston. Their quick thinking and split-second decision-making were the difference between a tense situation and a potential disaster. Without them, things could have gone very differently. And while we're handing out thanks, don't forget to give a special nod to Boeing for their oh-so-humane decision, letting NASA handle mission control for Starliner. I mean, why take on the stress themselves when they can just outsource the nail-biting to someone else? Classic teamwork, right? Clearly, Boeing is completely incapable at such points, in contrast to SpaceX, which runs their Crew Dragon flights directly from their own headquarters in Hawthorne, California. No outsourcing. No handing off responsibility. Nearly 5 months after an uncrewed Starliner undocked from the International Space Station, Boeing announced that it lost an additional $500 million from its troubled spacecraft, as the fate of its contract with NASA remains unclear. Boeing reported a total of $523 million in losses from the Starliner Commercial Crew Program in 2024. That brings the total amount of losses from the ill-fated program to a whopping $2 billion in cost overruns. Boeing cited highly complex designs and technical challenges, as well as schedule delays and cost impacts, that increased the cost estimates for its programs. At exactly 12:19 p.m. on Friday, April 4th, a SpaceX Dragon capsule made a historic splashdown off the coast of California, concluding a groundbreaking journey. This wasn't your average mission. For 4 intense days, 4 international astronauts soared around Earth, not just in orbit, but passing over both the North and South poles. This ambitious adventure, dubbed Fram-2, marks the first time humans have ever completed such a polar orbit. And guess who led this history-making mission? Cryptocurrency billionaire Chun Wang, who not only bankrolled the project, but also took part in the flight himself. He was joined by an inspiring trio of first-time space explorers: Norwegian filmmaker Jannicke Mikkelsen, German robotics expert Rabea Roga, and Australian polar adventurer Eric Phillips. None had ever been to space before. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk didn't miss the moment, tweeting, "Congrats, SpaceX Dragon team." The mission took off Monday night from Florida, riding a Falcon 9 rocket into space. Once detached, the Dragon spacecraft cruised solo, darting from pole to pole using its onboard thrusters. And talk about milestones. This was SpaceX's 50th Dragon flight. Plus, it marks a series of impressive spaceflight firsts. For the first time, a SpaceX private mission has no U.S. astronauts. The first ever crewed polar orbit, the first X-ray of a human taken in space, and SpaceX's first Crew Dragon recovery off the California coast. The official return of recovery ops to the West Coast, a strategic shift from Florida to cut down on space debris re-entry risks. The recent Crew 9 splashdown was the last one off Florida's shores. To be honest, this coast-to-coast operation is no small feat. Moving recovery vessels like the MV Shannon from Florida to California costs a fortune in fuel and logistics. Kiko Donchev, SpaceX's vice president of launch, shared his appreciation. It took a massive amount of work to move Dragon 2 recovery operations from Florida to California. A huge shout to the SpaceX Recovery and Space Operations team for executing this first-time operation safely, reliably, and with precision. Lastly, a big thank you to our partners FAA News, USCG, and NASA for their partnership on our cross-country move. Safely splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, SpaceX's Dragon recovery vessel. Shannon recovered the spacecraft and hoisted it onto the ship's deck off the coast of Oceanside, California. The FRAM-2 crew remained strapped into their seats aboard Resilience, awaiting SpaceX recovery teams opening the hatch. Then, unlike most astronaut landings, the FRAM-2 crew exited their spacecraft unassisted, continuing research on the effects of microgravity on the human body. This test, according to SpaceX, was to characterize the ability of astronauts to perform unassisted functional tasks after short and long durations in space. The crew's ability to go from that zero-gravity environment back to normal gravity here on Earth, all while wearing a SpaceX's 35-pound, 16-kilogram spacesuit, can help anticipate astronauts' abilities when arriving to explore places like the Moon and Mars. Elon chimed in again. Welcome home. Those breakthroughs came just months after Polaris Dawn featured the company's first extravehicular activity, EVA. Step by step, SpaceX is moving beyond its established playbook, experimenting with bold new mission profiles and reshaping what we expect from private space exploration. The momentum, unmistakably promising. Throughout their 3 to 5 day journey, the FRAM-2 crew took full advantage of Dragon's panoramic cupola, gazing down at Earth's polar regions from an altitude of 425 to 450 kilometers, about 249 to 264 miles. Working alongside space physicists and citizen scientists, they studied strange and beautiful light phenomena in the upper atmosphere, glowing green fragments and soft mauve ribbons resembling auroras. Among the most intriguing sights were emissions similar to a rare phenomenon known as STEVE, strong thermal emission velocity enhancement, typically observed between 400 and 500 kilometers, 249 to 311 miles above Earth. These shimmering bands offered not just visual wonder but valuable scientific data. But the mission wasn't all sightseeing. The crew also conducted cutting-edge research into how spaceflight impacts the human body. One major milestone: they aimed to capture the first-ever X-ray of a human in space, a groundbreaking moment in space medicine. FRAM-2 wasn't just about new perspectives, but new orbits too. The team flew in a bold 90-degree circular orbit, far steeper than the more common 51.6-degree angle used in previous missions. This rare trajectory allowed them to cross both poles, creating opportunities for unique studies. One particularly imaginative experiment involved growing mushrooms in microgravity, an early test for using fungi as a sustainable food source on future deep space missions, especially those targeting Mars. To make the mission more interactive, FRAM-2 also launched the FRAM-2 Ham competition, inviting amateur radio operators around the world to decode images transmitted from space. It was a fun and educational way to involve the public in real-time space exploration. Mission Commander Chun Wang shared his enthusiasm for exploring the polar regions from orbit, expressing hope that their stunning imagery would spark new insights into the planet we call home. Dr. Christopher Combs, the Associate Dean of Research at the Klessa College of Engineering and Integrated Design at the University of Texas at San Antonio, described the mission as a notch above a gimmick, but not exactly a groundbreaking milestone, with the planned experiments described as offering limited scientific value and able to be conducted regardless of the flight path. Indeed, none of the 22 life science experiments aboard Fram-2 actually required the spacecraft to enter a polar orbit. This type of trajectory hadn't been attempted in past crewed missions, largely due to the significant amount of fuel it demands. While most missions launch eastward to take advantage of Earth's rotation and conserve fuel, Fram-2 launched southward, an unusual move that offered no clear scientific or technical benefit. So why do it? Honestly, it seems the decision boiled down to the allure of doing something different. There wasn't a compelling mission-critical reason for choosing a polar path, aside from perhaps the novelty and spectacle of being the first. That said, the achievement is still incredibly impressive. Getting a crewed spacecraft into a polar orbit is no small feat. And SpaceX didn't just accomplish that. It also had enough fuel left over to land the Falcon 9 booster back on a drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean with stunning precision. But the spotlight on Fram-2's polar route kind of distracts from what might be the bigger story here: how routine private spaceflight is starting to feel. What was once pure science fiction is quickly becoming a new reality, almost ordinary, yet still utterly extraordinary. Initially, Crew Dragon Endurance was selected for this flight because it shares its name with Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic exploration vessel. Due to changes in the Crew Dragon manifest, however, Endurance was assigned to Crew 10, and it was decided to fly Fram-2 using Resilience. Can't help but be in awe of SpaceX's Fram-2, the next giant leap in space exploration. Drop your thoughts below. Joy upon joy. On the very same day the Fram-2 mission returned home, a major announcement lit up the aerospace world. SpaceX, ULA, and Blue Origin have been awarded a staggering $13.7 billion in U.S. military launch contracts through 2029. Unveiled on April 4th by the U.S. Space Force's Space Systems Command, the contracts are part of the National Security Space Launch, NSSL, Phase 3, Lane 2 initiative, an essential program aimed at securing the Pentagon's access to space for its most sensitive and high-stakes missions. SpaceX landed the largest share with $5.9 billion, followed by United Launch Alliance, ULA, at nearly $5.4 billion, and Blue Origin with $2.4 billion. In total, the three space giants are expected to conduct 54 missions between the fiscal years 2025 and 2029. This is a strategic investment in assured access to space, said General Chance Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations for the U.S. Space Force. A robust and resilient space launch architecture is the foundation of both our economic prosperity and our national security. Breaking it down, SpaceX will handle about 28 missions, roughly 60%. ULA will take on 19 launches, roughly 35%. Blue Origin, though still awaiting certification for its New Glenn rocket, is set for 7 missions, pending approval. The Lane 2 portion of the Phase 3 program focuses on complex launches to high-energy orbits with enhanced mission assurance requirements, such as secure communications and missile warning systems, making it the most demanding category of national security launch assignments. Missions are typically assigned 2 years ahead of their scheduled launches. Flights under these new contracts are expected to take place from the fiscal year 2027 through 2032. Blue Origin's inclusion is particularly noteworthy. This marks the first time 3 providers have been selected to handle these critical government payloads. Even though New Glenn has flown only once and hasn't yet been certified, the Space Force is betting big on its future potential, showing confidence that the rocket will be mission-ready in time. Meanwhile, ULA, a collaboration between Boeing and Lockheed Martin, recently crossed a huge milestone with the long-awaited certification of its Vulcan rocket on March 26th. That rocket is now cleared to begin flying NSSL Phase 2 missions later this year. In short, April 4th wasn't just a win for FRAM-2, it was a full-blown power move for U.S. space dominance. The Phase 3 acquisition strategy is split into two lanes. Lane 1 is geared toward less risk-averse, commercial-like missions and includes about 30 launches. Lane 2 targets high-stakes missions that demand elevated performance and security standards. These contracts ensure continued access to this vital domain, said Major General Stephen Purdy, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space Acquisition and Integration. Under the contract, all three companies will be required to meet stringent mission assurance standards, including joint integration efforts with government teams to safeguard mission success. The launch providers will be assigned missions on an annual basis, with the first round of fiscal 2025 mission awards to be announced later this year. Assignments will continue annually, each October through the end of the contract period. The Phase 3 contracts build on the Pentagon's efforts to eliminate dependence on Russian-made AR-D-180 engines and to foster a competitive U.S. launch market capable of meeting national security agencies' evolving space requirements. The keyword 6DOF recently made headlines following an Ars Technica article featuring NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, who recounted their desperate journey to the ISS aboard Boeing's Starliner last summer. So, why do I describe it as desperate? Okay, for those who haven't read the article yet, 6DOF, or 6 degrees of freedom, refers to the ability of a spacecraft to maneuver in three-dimensional space across 6 independent axes: translational axes, forward-backward, left-right, and up-down; rotational axes, yaw, pitch, and roll. Starliner uses thrusters housed in 4 doghouses, clusters of thrusters, to control its movement across these 6 degrees of freedom. Each thruster contributes to specific maneuvers, enabling precise adjustments for docking, re-entry, and other operations. As the spacecraft approached the ISS, multiple thruster failures compromised its ability to maintain full control. First thruster failure reduced redundancy, but did not compromise control. The second thruster failure left Starliner single-fault tolerant, meaning one more failure would risk losing 6 degrees of freedom control. Third thruster failure brought Starliner to zero-fault tolerance, making control sluggish and leaving no margin for additional failures. Terribly, the fourth thruster failed, resulting in the loss of 6 degrees of freedom control, preventing forward maneuvering and jeopardizing docking and re-entry capabilities. At this point, astronaut Butch Willmore manually controlled the spacecraft with partial functionality, while Mission Control initiated a critical reset that restored 2 thrusters temporarily. As Wilmore's crewmate, Suni Williams, put it, "This is a very precarious situation we're in. Now imagine if they had completely lost 6 degrees of freedom control. In theory, that would have meant no ability to maneuver effectively, potentially sending the spacecraft tumbling or drifting uncontrollably." Wilmore knew their position relative to the International Space Station was critical. Being in a lower orbit meant they were moving faster than the ISS, so any further loss of control could have sent them drifting away, making an already dire situation even worse. At that point, their best bet was to attempt docking with the ISS, rather than risking an uncontrolled descent to Earth. But even that was easier said than done. Without full control, their ability to dock or return safely was severely compromised. The only guiding light in this chaos was Mission Control. Losing communication would have left them relying solely on manual control and onboard systems, on a spacecraft with malfunctioning thrusters. You can feel how desperate the situation was then. When this story finally came to light, the public was stunned by the sheer gravity of the situation. But what made it even more shocking was NASA's silence. For a long time, they kept the severity of the crisis under wraps. Remember when NASA held a meeting to decide whether Starliner could bring the astronauts home? Boeing and NASA brushed off concerns, reassuring everyone that everything was fine. Just a minor precaution, they said, as they quietly handed the return mission over to SpaceX. NASA has always had a way of keeping things optimistic, even when its astronauts have already gone through dire moments. A typical example is in the Crew Flight Test CFT post-docking media call. Ken Kirtland IV, an Apogee YouTube creator, pointed out that while NASA's statements in the media call lined up with the latest data in the Ars Technical article, there was one big elephant in the room. They don't mention the loss of control for 6 degrees of freedom, but they do list out all the thrusters that failed in detail. And I guess if any of us had taken the time, we would have been able to tell. And honestly, that has a point. Right after docking, NASA wasn't going to sound the alarm, Ken explained. That's just how space agencies work. They emphasize the success. The crew made it to the ISS safely, rather than the failures like thruster malfunctions, helium leaks, and yes, losing 6 degrees of freedom control. But let's be real. If NASA had said outright, "We lost control of the spacecraft," it would have sent shockwaves through the industry. Instead, they listed the thruster failures, knowing full well that analysts and journalists would connect the dots. That's classic NASA. Informative, but never inflammatory. It sounds more like strategic. NASA has never been one to publicly drag its partners. Just look at how they handled other commercial space setbacks in the past, like SpaceX's Commercial Resupply Services 7 failure. They always maintain a supportive stance, even when things go south. Bear in mind the letter from NASA Administrator Charles Bolden on the loss of the SpaceX's CRS-7 mission. I can feel the words inside are light and optimistic. Do you think the same? Plus, at that stage, they simply didn't have all the data to be hypercritical, according to Ken's statement. And let's not forget, despite all of Starliner's issues, it still successfully got a crew to the ISS. That's no small feat. So, some optimism? Understandable. Another perfect example of NASA's media playbook? The way they handled Boeing's return delay. Instead of admitting outright concerns about Starliner's safety, they said, "So far we don't see any scenario where Starliner is not going to be able to bring Butch and Suni home." Sounds reassuring, right? But in reality, they did see scenarios where Starliner wasn't safe for re-entry. That's why Butch and Suni didn't return on Starliner. They waited for the much safer Crew Dragon. Why the careful wording? Simple. Public panic, confidence loss, public relations disaster. If NASA had said, "We're not sure if Starliner can bring the crew home safely," it wouldn't just hurt Boeing. It would shake confidence in the entire commercial crew program. NASA needs Starliner to work. It's the only backup to SpaceX's Crew Dragon, and after pouring billions into the program, scrapping it would be a disaster. Instead of saying outright, "Starliner isn't safe," NASA let its actions do the talking. They kept the crew on Crew Dragon. That decision alone speaks volumes. If NASA seemed extra cautious this time, it's because history has taught them hard lessons. A very popular example is the 1986 Challenger disaster. Engineers warned about the O-ring failure risk in cold weather. NASA ignored them. The shuttle exploded, killing all 7 aboard. Or, in the 2003 Columbia disaster, engineers flagged concerns about foam debris damaging the thermal protection system. NASA downplayed it. The shuttle disintegrated on re-entry, killing 7 more astronauts. Now, fast forward to Starliner CFT last June. The space agency knew about thruster failures and helium leaks before launch, but called them non-critical. The result? Worse than expected. The difference? This time, no one died. NASA simply got lucky. But when coming up with bringing astronauts home, Instead of risking another fatal mistake, they didn't let the go fever mentality win. They grounded Starliner for a crewed return, even though it risked upsetting Boeing. That's a big shift from the past. I know my take in this video seems more sympathetic to NASA, maybe different from my last ones. But that's what happens when you get more perspectives and dive into more sources. So now here's what we really need to ask. If Boeing tries another crewed mission with Starliner, will NASA finally change its tone? Or will we hear the same cautious optimism, even if serious concerns remain? Let me know what you think in the comments. The Boeing Starliner Crew Flight Test, CFT, a critical milestone in NASA's commercial crew program, faced significant challenges during its mission, highlighting ongoing issues with the spacecraft. Launched on June 5, 2024, aboard an Atlas V rocket, the Starliner carried 2 astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, for what was intended to be an 8-day mission to the International Space Station. However, the mission was finally extended to 286 days due to unexpected technical problems. Shortly after launch, the spacecraft experienced thruster failures, with 4 out of its 28 reaction control system thrusters malfunctioning. This forced NASA to waive some safety protocols to allow docking with the ISS. Despite these difficulties, the astronauts successfully docked and completed their objectives aboard the station. Concerns about the spacecraft's reliability led NASA to decide against using it for the crew's return journey. Instead, Starliner returned uncrewed on September 6, 2024. During its descent, additional issues arose, including a navigation system glitch and a failure of one of the capsule's re-entry thrusters. These problems added to a series of earlier setbacks for Starliner, including software errors and hardware malfunctions identified in previous uncrewed test flights. The mission's difficulties have raised questions about Boeing's ability to compete with SpaceX in providing reliable crew transportation for NASA. While Boeing has expressed confidence in Starliner's design and pledged to address these issues, the program remains under scrutiny as NASA evaluates its future role in human spaceflight. The development of the commercial crew program began in 2011 as NASA shifted from the internal development of crewed vehicles to perform ISS crew rotation to commercial industry development of transport to the ISS. A series of open competitions over the following 2 years saw successful bids from Boeing, Blue Origin, Sierra Nevada, and SpaceX to develop proposals for ISS crew transport vehicles. In 2014, NASA awarded separate fixed-price contracts to Boeing and SpaceX to develop their respective systems and to fly astronauts to the ISS. Each contract required 4 successful demonstrations to achieve a human rating for the system: pad abort, uncrewed orbital test, launch abort, and crewed orbital test. Operational missions were initially planned to begin in 2017, with missions alternating between the 2 providers. Delays required NASA to purchase additional seats on Soyuz spacecraft up to Soyuz MS-17 until Crew Dragon missions commenced in 2020. 58 years ago, a tragic accident during a launch rehearsal at Cape Kennedy claimed the lives of 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, when a fire erupted inside their cabin. Fueled by a pure oxygen atmosphere, flammable materials, and high-pressure systems, the fire spread rapidly, and the sealed hatch design made escape impossible. The astronauts ultimately died from toxic gas inhalation, rather than burns. This incident occurred during a period of intense pressure on NASA and its contractors to fulfill President Kennedy's ambitious goal: landing a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. Investigators uncovered a slew of design flaws: faulty wiring, flammable cabin materials, and inadequate emergency response procedures. Critics argued that the rush to meet deadlines came at the cost of safety. From this emerged the term "go fever," a culture that prioritizes mission goals over safety concerns. This mindset resurfaced in later disasters, like Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003. Worryingly, it hasn't gone away. In 2024, the same "go fever" seemed to return when NASA gave the green light for Boeing's Starliner spacecraft to conduct its first crewed flight, despite a history of technical problems and the ongoing helium leak. That summer, during the Starliner's approach to the International Space Station, a complex and delicate maneuver, 5 thrusters failed. Astronauts lost control of the vehicle, teetering on the edge of catastrophe. Fortunately, the heroes in mission control managed to resolve 4 failed thrusters, facilitating the successful docking. During the spacecraft docking to the ISS, NASA and Boeing tried to understand and mitigate these issues, but NASA finally deemed the risks too high for a crewed return. As a result, the agency quietly initiated a SpaceX Dragon rescue mission to bring the crew home, forcing the Starliner to return unmanned. More seriously, Charlie Camarda, a former NASA astronaut and aerospace engineer, via his tweet, expressed his concern that Starliner may be just a preview. Unless NASA changes course, Artemis could be next. In his words, NASA is risking more astronaut lives on Artemis II, its next crewed lunar mission, because of the pressure to outpace China in the new moon race, and what he describes as a failed Artemis moon architecture. So, is NASA pushing forward, or simply repeating history? The dangers of go fever loom large, and unless serious course corrections are made, Artemis could be the next tragic chapter. So what exactly did he mean by that? Well, both Artemis II and Boeing's Starliner are key pieces of NASA's larger puzzle when it comes to sending humans into space. Starliner, built by Boeing, is designed for low Earth orbit missions like ferrying astronauts to the International Space Station as part of NASA's Commercial Crew Program, CCP. Meanwhile, Artemis II is a major step in NASA's effort to return humans to the Moon, using the powerful Space Launch System, with a core stage built by Boeing and the Orion spacecraft, developed by Lockheed Martin. Although the two programs have very different destinations and vehicles, both have hit speed bumps. Artemis II has been delayed and is now aiming for April 2026, instead of late 2025, largely due to technical setbacks. One big concern has been the Orion capsule's heat shield. At the same time, the SLS has been under fire for its massive costs and slow development. Former NASA astronaut Don Thomas Camarda seems to be making a broader point. These aren't isolated problems. He's connecting the dots, pointing to a troubling pattern of ongoing technical and operational issues in NASA's current human spaceflight programs. And here's where it gets a bit more alarming. Camarda raises the question of whether NASA is continuing to compromise safety in the name of progress. He's especially critical of the latest Starliner test, where astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams temporarily lost control of the spacecraft because multiple thrusters failed during docking. As you know, the thruster malfunction is very familiar in the previous Starliner tests, and its root cause has not been resolved. That was Willmore's biggest concern ahead of the flight. NASA chose to ignore that and override flight safety rules to greenlight the mission to launch. Camarda flags this as a red flag. What happens when deadlines and competition, especially with China's lunar ambitions, start outweighing safety protocols? He's worried this mindset might carry over to Artemis II. After all, it's the first time humans will fly aboard Orion and travel around the Moon, a huge milestone. The crew includes Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen. If the Artemis system has the same kinds of flaws, and if NASA is willing to take shortcuts, the implications could be serious for astronaut safety. Now, here's another angle. Boeing's footprint is all over both of these projects. They didn't just make Starliner, they're also the lead contractor for the SLS rocket that will power Artemis II. While Camarda didn't call them out directly in his comments about Artemis, the pattern is hard to ignore. Starliner has struggled with delays and reliability issues, and Boeing's involvement in SLS is raising eyebrows too. GAO's reports have criticized how NASA awarded Boeing and other contractors large bonuses, even as problems and delays mounted. So maybe Camarda's message is also a subtle warning about Boeing's track record and its influence on both critical programs. So what's your take on these above perspectives? Let me know in the comments. The Artemis program, NASA's ambitious initiative to return humans to the Moon and pave the way for Mars exploration, is a multifaceted endeavor with a clear purpose, a complex origin, a structured framework, and a history marked by controversies. Launched in 2017 under Space Policy Directive 1 during the Trump administration, Artemis aims to land astronauts on the lunar South Pole by mid-2027, starting with Artemis III, following the uncrewed Artemis II in 2027, 2022, and the crewed Artemis II lunar flyby, scheduled for April 2026. Its primary goals are to establish a sustainable human presence on the Moon through infrastructure like the Artemis Base Camp and the Gateway Lunar Space Station. Advance scientific discovery by studying lunar resources like water ice and prepare technologies for future Mars missions, all while maintaining U.S. leadership in space amid competition with China, which plans a lunar landing by 2030. The program builds on the canceled Constellation program, repurposing elements like the Orion spacecraft and the Space Launch System, SLS rocket, and was spurred by geopolitical motivations, including a 2019 push by Vice President Mike Pence to land on the Moon by 2024, a timeline later deemed unrealistic. Structurally, Artemis is a series of missions supported by key components. The SLS, a Boeing-built heavy-lift rocket. The Orion spacecraft, constructed by Lockheed Martin with a European service module. The Human Landing System, HLS, with SpaceX's Starship selected for Artemis III and Blue Origin contracted for later missions. And the Gateway, a lunar orbit station for staging missions. Supporting infrastructure includes the commercial lunar payload services, rovers, spacesuits, and international partnerships through the Artemis Accords, signed by 50 countries with contributions like Canada's Canadarm3 for the Gateway. However, the program has not been without scandals and criticisms. Delays have plagued Artemis, with the original 2024 landing goal pushed to 2027 due to technical issues like the Orion heat shield's excessive charring during Artemis I, and Artemis II delayed to 2026. Safety concerns have also emerged, with a 2023 NASA safety panel warning of real physical risks from engineering compromises driven by tight schedules and budget constraints, a concern echoed by former astronaut Charlie Camarda, who criticized NASA for risking lives on Artemis II due to a failed Artemis moon architecture, and drew parallels to the Boeing Star liner's 2024 thruster failures during an ISS docking attempt, where NASA waived safety protocols. The Artemis moon architecture refers to the integrated system of spacecraft, rockets, landers, and operational plans NASA has developed to achieve its goal of sustainable lunar exploration. This includes Space Launch System, SLS, a heavy-lift rocket built by Boeing, designed to launch the Orion spacecraft and other payloads for deep space missions. Orion spacecraft, built by Lockheed Martin, this capsule will carry astronauts to lunar orbit and back, starting with Artemis II. Human Landing System, HLS, a lunar lander to take astronauts from lunar orbit to the Moon's surface. SpaceX's Starship was selected as the primary HLS for Artemis III, with Blue Origin developing a second lander for later missions. Gateway Lunar Space Station, a small space station in lunar orbit, serving as a staging point for lunar landings and a hub for scientific research. Supporting systems. This includes ground operations, mission control, spacesuits, rovers, and international commercial partnerships. Examples: contributions from the European Space Agency, Canadian Space. Cost overruns are another issue, with the SLS costing over $4 billion per launch, prompting criticism of the program's sustainability, especially given funding uncertainties in the federal budget. The HLS contract process sparked controversy when NASA initially awarded SpaceX the sole contract in 2021, leading Blue Origin to sue for unfair selection, though they later secured a second contract in 2023. Technical criticisms include the Gateway's complex near-rectilinear halo orbit and the unproven nature of technologies like Starship HLS, which requires in-orbit refueling. Boeing's role has also drawn scrutiny, as its struggles with Starliner raise questions about its work on the SLS, a critical Artemis component. Politically, the program has been framed as a race against China, with Camarda warning that competitive pressure might lead NASA to cut corners, a concern rooted in the 2024 timeline's political motivations tied to the Trump administration's re-election goals. Public and expert criticism further highlights the program's high costs versus benefits, especially when compared to cheaper commercial alternatives like SpaceX's Starship, and NASA's lack of transparency about issues like the Orion heat shield or Starliner setbacks has eroded trust. Despite these challenges, Artemis remains a bold vision for humanity's future in space, aiming to inspire a new generation while navigating the technical, financial, and political hurdles of deep space exploration. With its stepwise approach, uncrewed tests, crewed flybys, lunar landings, and sustained presence, Artemis seeks to achieve a historic milestone, but its success hinges on addressing the systemic issues that have fueled its controversies. When NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams returned to Earth after spending 9 months aboard the International Space Station, the primary concern was their physical condition. Fortunately, their recovery has gone smoothly. In their first press conference since landing, both appeared to be in great shape, quite a contrast from the exhausted state they were in right after exiting the Dragon spacecraft. A heartwarming update came on April 1st, when Suni Williams posted a video on her X account showing her joyfully playing with her dogs at home. It was a clear sign that she's bounced back both mentally and physically. Now that their health is no longer a concern, attention has shifted to another topic: compensation. Given that their mission stretched several months longer than originally planned, many are asking, did they get paid for the extra time? And what about overtime? NASA addressed the pay issue, stating, "When NASA astronauts are aboard the International Space Station, they receive regular 40-hour work-week salaries. They do not receive overtime or holiday weekend pay." Butch and Suni fall under the GS-15 pay grade level, the highest rank in the general schedule GS system. According to the Go government website, GS-13 to GS-15 involves top-level technical and supervisory positions with annual salaries ranging from $125,133 to $162,672. With that said, for their extended 9-month mission, the prorated earnings are estimated to be between $93,850 and $122,004. For the lower grades, such as GS-12 to 13, the pay scale is from $100,287 to $155,034. NASA's website also states that an astronaut's annual salary is about $152,258 per year. This pay rate reflects the 2024 pay schedules and is an approximation. This rate will be adjusted to reflect any increase in 2025. NASA also clarified, while in space, NASA astronauts are on official travel orders as federal employees, so their transportation, lodging, and meals are provided. They also are on long-term TDY and receive the incidentals amount for each day they are in space. The incidentals amount is reduced by the percentage required for the length of the trip per federal travel regulations. So, what does that mean in practical terms? Williams and Willmore may each receive a small daily stipend for incidentals, reportedly around $4 per day. Former NASA astronaut Katie Coleman explained, "There is some small amount of money per day for incidentals that they end up being legally obligated to pay you." During her own 159-day mission in 2010 through 2011, Coleman received about $636 in additional pay. Based on similar calculations, Williams and Willmore could earn around $1,148 each for their extended 287-day mission. While this aligns with federal policy, the modest compensation didn't sit well with U.S. President Donald Trump. At a recent press conference, he said he'd be willing to cover the astronauts' overtime pay out of his own pocket. He also expressed gratitude to Elon Musk for safely bringing the astronauts back.
Well, nobody's ever mentioned this to me. If I have to, I'll pay it out of my own pocket, okay? I'll get it for him. And I want to thank Elon Musk, by the way, because think if we don't have him. You know, there's only so long, even though they're in the capsule up there, that the body starts to deteriorate after 9 or 10 months and gets really bad after 14, 15 months with the bones and the blood and all the things that you've been reporting on very well. And if we don't have Elon, they could be up there a long time. Who else is going to get him? And I just want to thank him. He's going through a lot, what they're doing to him.
In addition to their salaries, NASA astronauts receive a robust benefits package. And this isn't just a bonus. It's a comprehensive support system aimed at ensuring the physical, mental, and financial well-being of astronauts and their families, both during their careers and long after. Here's a closer look. First, comprehensive healthcare coverage. NASA provides top-tier medical services, including regular checkups, preventive care, and treatments tailored to the unique challenges astronauts face. Keeping astronauts in peak health is essential, not just for their space missions, but for the intense training leading up to them. Second, retirement plans. Astronauts are enrolled in the Federal Employees Retirement System, FERS, which includes Social Security, a basic benefit plan, and the Thrift Savings Plan, TSP. Together, these provide a solid foundation for financial stability after retirement. Third, life insurance. To provide peace of mind, astronauts receive strong life insurance coverage, ensuring their families are financially protected should anything unexpected occur. Fourth, paid time off. Even astronauts need work-life balance. NASA offers generous paid time off, including vacation days, sick leave, and federal holidays. This time is essential for astronauts to recharge and stay mentally sharp amid the high-stress environment of space exploration. Fifth, training and development opportunities. NASA heavily invests in the growth of its astronauts. From intense training programs that prepare them for the rigors of space to continued education and skill development, NASA ensures its astronauts are constantly learning and improving. It's not just a job, it's a lifelong journey of excellence. Altogether, this benefits package reflects NASA's commitment to its crew. With this level of support, astronauts can focus entirely on their mission, pushing the boundaries of what humanity can achieve in space. In addition, there is also no age restriction for being a NASA astronaut. Astronaut candidates selected in the past have ranged between the ages of 26 and 46, with the average age being 34. In terms of academic background, you should have a degree in fields like engineering, biological science, physical science, computer science, or mathematics. So, are you ready to join NASA's astronaut selection? Now, let's rewind a bit and take a look at how things have changed since the early days of space exploration. specifically the Apollo era, which ran from 1961 to 1972. Back in 1962, when the Apollo program was just taking off, astronauts earned between $8,330 and $12,770 a year, depending on experience and qualifications. Sure, that might sound low today, but at the time, the cost of living was much lower. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $73,000 to $112,000 in today's dollars, still noticeably less than modern astronaut salaries. Why the big difference? For one, the space program was still in its early stages, and the economy was totally different. Budgets were tighter, and spaceflight was still largely experimental. Many Apollo astronauts were also active-duty military personnel assigned to NASA, so their pay followed military rates, not civilian ones. That kept their official salaries modest. But what the Apollo astronauts may have lacked in financial compensation, they more than made up for in legacy. These were the heroes of the space race, figures who helped establish America's dominance in space during the Cold War. Their achievements, like the historic Apollo 11 moon landing, are etched into human history. These astronauts became global icons, household names who symbolized courage, innovation, and the limitless potential of humanity. While Apollo astronauts were celebrated for their groundbreaking achievements during a politically charged era, modern astronauts focus on collaborative scientific endeavors that have tangible benefits for humanity and future exploration. Today's astronauts conduct advanced research aboard the International Space Station, contributing to medical advancements, climate science, and technological innovation that directly benefit humanity. They work in a multinational environment, fostering international cooperation and unity through joint missions like those on the ISS. They advance technologies for long-term human presence in space, for example, Artemis missions, paving the way for Mars exploration and sustainable lunar habitation. Modern astronauts inspire future generations through STEM outreach programs, connecting with students globally via live broadcasts and educational initiatives. Their missions support industries such as aerospace manufacturing and commercial spaceflight, driving economic growth and innovation. What's even more fascinating is how the rise of private spaceflight has completely redefined what it means to be an astronaut. It's no longer a title reserved only for government-employed professionals. Today, civilians, yes, regular people, are also making their way into space through commercial missions. This shift is clearly seen in groundbreaking missions like SpaceX's Inspiration 4, Polaris Dawn, and Fram 2. These missions have proven that private citizens can now train and fly to space through commercial programs, something that was unthinkable just a decade ago. Unlike NASA or ESA's strict selection process, private space participants go through specially tailored training programs designed for civilians. While they still need to pass physical and mental health screenings, the bar isn't as high as it is for career astronauts. These private astronauts train in key areas such as emergency procedures, adapting to zero gravity, and basic spacecraft operations. Take Inspiration 4, for example. The crew trained for 6 months to master the SpaceX Crew Dragon systems and prepare for their journey in orbit. But these missions aren't just for thrill seekers. Many blend personal goals with larger causes. Inspiration 4, for instance, raised a stunning $200 million for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, while also conducting health-related research during its 3-day orbital mission. All of this is made possible thanks to advancements in space technology, especially the development of automated spacecraft like SpaceX's Crew Dragon. These systems are so sophisticated that they no longer require professional astronauts on board to fly safely, paving the way for civilians to participate directly in space missions. That said, this new era isn't without its challenges. Including civilians in space exploration introduces a new set of ethical and medical questions. Participants must work with aerospace medical professionals to evaluate individual health risks based on the specifics of their mission. It's a delicate balance, making space accessible while keeping safety and mission integrity intact. In the big picture, private spaceflight is reshaping the landscape of human space exploration. It's opening the door for more people to experience space firsthand while also pushing the boundaries of what's possible, ethically, medically, and operationally. The future of space isn't just about astronauts in government suits anymore. It's about everyone with the passion, preparation, and opportunity to look beyond Earth. So how about you? Do you want to fly on a Dragon one day to become an astronaut? Let me know in the comments.